Our parsha this week, Shoftim, is primarily about leadership. It opens by calling upon the people to appoint magistrates and judges over themselves to govern with mishpat tzedek, which is the phrase that's used, mishpat tzedek. Both words, mishpat and tzedek, mean justice. But mishpat is more connected to the rule of law, and tzedek has the sense of righteousness. So together it's a kind of righteous justice, a kind of law-abiding goodness. The second and third verses of the parsha address the leaders themselves, telling them to judge their fellows fairly, not to show partiality, not to take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes. The third verse famously says, tzedek, tzedek tirdof. You've heard that? Justice, justice shall you pursue. Less famously, it says, Lema'an tichye v'yarashta et ha'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach. In order that you will live in the land that Adonai your God is giving to you. In other words, the people's ability to thrive and remain in the land is dependent upon their leaders' pursuit of justice. Later in the parsha, the text says, if, once you've settled in the land, you want to place a king over you, to be like your neighbors who have kings, you can. But make sure that the king doesn't amass too many horses or too many wives or too much gold and silver. And make sure that the king writes a Torah scroll and reads it every day of his life so that he'll fear God. Levilti rum levavo me'echav. To prevent him from becoming arrogant before his people, or so that he will not lack humility before his people, or literally, so that he will not elevate his heart or distance his heart from his brothers. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs notes that the passage repeats, the king must not, and must not, and must not. The accumulation of prohibitions is a clear signal, he says, Rabbi Sachs says, that the Torah sees the institution as fraught with danger. Only one man is commanded in the Torah to be humble, the king, Sachs says. Moses is articulating a quite different view of politics. Virtually every other thinker, this is Sachs's voice, Jonathan Sachs's voice, virtually every other thinker has defined politics as the use of power. Moses defines politics as the use of self-restraint. Politics for Moses is about the voice of God within the human heart. It is about the ability to hear the words, thou shalt not. Taken together, the first 25 verses of the parsha tell the people that it is their responsibility to choose their government, their judiciary, their law enforcement, and their executive branch, and to choose it carefully. They need to have the rule of law. They need to have trustworthy leaders to uphold the rule of law. They need to have leaders who will actively pursue what is just and what is righteous, what is fair and what is good for the people. And specifically, they must not allow their leaders to become selfish or greedy or power-hungry or arrogant or corrupt or removed from the hearts of their brothers and sisters and siblings. Leaders in particular are to fear God, the text says, to tremble before God, studying daily to ensure that they exercise the utmost restraint so as not to veer from what is good and what is right. Hirsch Goldberg Polin deserved better leaders. Aiden Yerushalmi and Carmel Gat and Ori Danino and Alexander Lobanov and Almog Sorusi deserved better leaders. They survived in tunnels for more than 325 days, and now they are dead. The cruelty and barbarity of Hamas is stunning. Let's be completely clear. Hamas held 6 innocent people in tunnels for almost a year and then murdered them. And there are 95 more still in captivity. That is not Israel's fault. And every hostage still in a tunnel deserves better leaders. Every parent and sibling and cousin and friend of a hostage deserves better leaders. Every parent of an IDF soldier or reservist deserves better leaders. Every displaced person in Israel deserves better leaders. The tens of thousands of Israelis filling the streets deserve better leaders. Every Jew around the world who is in some sense represented by Israel's government deserves better leaders. Every Jew who trembles at the mass murder of Gazans over the course of this year deserves better leaders. Every Jew who is nauseous about the ongoing mass homelessness and starvation and injuries and orphanhood of children deserves better leaders. Every Jew who is terrified by the lawlessness of armed settlers in the West Bank deserves better leaders. Every Jew who is terrified by Iran and its proxies deserves better leaders. Every Jew who is afraid of global anti-Semitism deserves better leaders. Every Jew who believes that the only future in which we can thrive is one in which Palestinians can also thrive deserves better leaders. The Torah was not written in a vacuum or in a time without external pressures from enemies that could destroy the Commonwealth. Of course, in the time of the Tanakh, there was no Hamas or Hezbollah or Houthis or Islamic Republic of Iran, but Israel and Judea were always surrounded by enemies, by armed forces who threatened their demise, always, from the Moabites to the Philistines to the Egyptians to the Assyrians to the Babylonians to the Greek and Roman empires. David Beale, Zichrono Livracha, our member Noam Beale's father, who died very recently and was a luminary among Jewish studies scholars, argues in his book, Power and Powerlessness in Jewish History, that brief moments of true Jewish sovereignty during David and Solomon's rule, or Josiah's rule, or Hezekiah's rule, or the Hasmonean rule, were the exception, and were only possible because of a decline or a hiatus in the power of the surrounding empires. The Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Seleucids. For most of our history, our ability to thrive depended upon not primarily military might, but upon our leaders' ability to form relationships with the surrounding empires. Bill goes on to argue that the contrast we have in our imagination between Jewish powerlessness in the diaspora and Jewish power in Israel is false. Instead, wherever we have lived, Jews have thrived when we have been able to form relationships and alliances with powers around us. It isn't that our own power is irrelevant. It is not. We learned from the 20th century that we must have power. It is that our own power alone is insufficient. Given our size in the world, relationships and alliances will always be essential to our survival. What the Torah understood, what the prophets understood, what the rabbis understood as they look back at the demise of our sovereignty is that the quality of our own leadership, its ethics, its commitment to justice, its righteousness, and the ability of our leaders to make agreement with surrounding enemies in humility and for the good of our people would be the deciding factor, even more consequential than the nature of the surrounding powers, of whether we lived and thrived in the land or did not. And what this parsha also understood is that you can blame the leaders all you want, but it is ultimately up to the people to choose and remove their leaders. Even in the case of a king, the leaders serve at the will of the people and not the other way around, according to Torah. 2 of the verses in our parsha are directed at the leaders, and all the others are directed at the people about what they should expect of their leaders, about the people's responsibility to choose their leaders well and to insist that those leaders uphold what is expected of them or face removal. No question, Hamas is evil and to blame, but the Netanyahu government is still in power despite failing every test our Torah gives for the qualifications and expectations of our leaders. Hirsch, Carmel, Aiden, Ori, Alex, and Almog are dead. May they rest in peace. And may their memories forever be a blessing. But there are still dozens of hostages alive somewhere under Gaza. Will our people keep allowing this government to stay in power? Or will we save their lives? Please, let's save their lives. Shabbat shalom.